Section 1 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Buchanan. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Pure Liquid Honey in Glass Jars, by Charles Dadant. Under this heading I find an article from Mr. W. M. Hoge, who says that he has invented a way of preparing liquid honey so that it will not congeal. He adds that this discovery will be beneficial to beekeepers, and he explains how we will profit by it. The tendency of honey to candy, for all the adulterators of honey, has proved to be a great impediment, while for the producers it is a good characteristic, for it is the best stamp that a beekeeper can put on his product, a stamp that the adulterators are unable to counterfeit. Now that the consumers at large begin to give their preference to candied honey, the adulterators, seeing their sales decreasing, try to invent some means to stop this result and incite us to help them to continue their fraudulent practice. Let us remember that the candying of honey is the best test of purity thus far, that by preventing honey from candying, we lower it to the level of glucosed honey, and that as long as liquid honey can be found on our markets, we will be compelled to compete with adulterated honey, for the profit of this adulteration will always tempt the unscrupulous dealers, while we will be unable to compete with them for the price. A few years ago we could find liquid honey in glass jars in every good grocery. 3 years ago, I produced at the Western Illinois and Eastern Iowa Convention, held in Burlington, Iowa, one of these bottles bought in St. Louis, labeled Pure Extracted Honey from John Long, New York. Mr. Hoge, who resided in New York at that time, probably knows John Long. This pure honey was analyzed by an expert chemist and found mostly glucose. These jars and tumblers are now of slow sale, for the consumers begin to have confidence in candied honey. We are, therefore, in a fair way for selling our product. Let us go on and turn the cold shoulder to the advice of those who have so far caused more prejudice than profit to beekeepers. Mr. Hoge, who has visited the old continent, knows as well as I do that in Europe liquid honey is unsaleable, for the consumers are accustomed to buying candied honey. Let us persist in our efforts to educate the people on this question, and we will drive all spurious honey from our markets. Hamilton, Illinois, February 2, 1881. End of recording. End of Section 1. Recording by Grace Buchanan.
Section 2 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stevens. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Colchian Honey, by the Reverend W. Ballantyne, A.M. I see in the Bee Journal, under the above caption, a question from Mr. H. G. Colwell of Columbus, Ohio, relative to the effects of honey eaten by the Grecian troops under Xenophon as they passed through Colchia in their famous retreat homeward. In regard to this, you propose a query. Why did the ancient Colchian honey cause the above disorder? I have frequently had my attention turned to this subject in reading Xenophon's Anabasis in the original, from which the extract by Mr. Colwell is taken. From the best sources of information at my command, the following seems to be the most rational. The honey of Asia Minor in many localities appears to be gathered from the flowers of the order Apocynoceae, or dog's bane. Of this order, Professor Wilson, in his Botany, page 588, observes, quote, "These plants possess active and often suspicious qualities residing in the white juice with which the order is pervaded, and in the seeds, which are often deadly poisons. The alkaloid strychnine or strychnia, one of the most violent poisons, is the active principle of the Strychoria nux vomica of India. It is sometimes administered as a medicine, but with doubtful success. A single seed of one species is sufficient to kill 20 persons. The order is generally emetic." End quote. In corroboration of this, I will give you the opinion of the celebrated Ainsworth, who travelled over the route of the Grecians and took notes of all the localities and incidents recorded by Xenophon. He observes that, quote, "This fact of the honey of Asia Minor being in certain places and at certain seasons of a poisonous nature was known to all antiquity and is very common at the present day, so much so that I have known the peasants to inquire if we would prefer the bitter or the sweet honey, for the honey so qualified has a slight but not unpleasant bitterness, and is preferred by many from producing, when taken in moderate quantities, the effect of slight intoxication. Pliny notices 2 kinds of honey, one found at Heraclea in Pontus, and another among the Sani or Mocrones. The first he supposed to be produced by a plant called Egolithron or goat's bane, the second by a species of rhododendron. Dioscorides, Diodorus, Siculus, and Aristotle all notice the honey of Heraclea pontica. The celebrated botanist Tournefort ascertained on the spot that the honey of bees feeding on the Azalea pontica, as also on the Rhododendron ponticum, possessed mischievous properties, but as the bitter and intoxicating honey is found in many parts of Asia Minor, where these plants do not flower, it is extremely probable that these peculiar properties are further derived from the flower of the Nerium oleander, or common rose laurel, the leaves of which are known to be acrid and poisonous. The natural family to which the rose laurel belongs, Apocynaceae, is distinguished by plants endued with dangerous and fatal properties, and these act on the nerves so as to produce stupefaction. Rhodoraceae also possesses narcotic properties, but in a less marked degree." End quote. It appears from this that the honey gathered by the bees from these poisonous plants possessed some of the inherent qualities of the plants themselves, and operated like a narcotic or opiate on the nerves, producing stupefaction and intoxication. If you see proper, you can give the above a place in the weekly, with which I am, so far, very well pleased. Sago, Ohio. End of section 2. Section 3 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stevens. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Combined Summer and Winter Stand, by H. L. Penfield. The engraving shows a perspective view of a combined winter and summer stand, which I put up to accommodate 12 hives of the standard Langstroth pattern. It is constructed as follows. Put in the ground 9 oak posts, 4 by 4 inches, for a frame to nail the 14-foot boards to. 3 posts on each side, and 3 between these, set in the ground 18 inches. The ends are 9 feet wide, which I find gives ample room to manipulate the bees between the rows of hives, the operator being in the shade and not in front of the entrance of the bees, which seldom bother me. The sides front, east and west. The ends are open during the summer and the north end boarded up in winter. We use millet hay for protection, filling in spaces between the hives and over and under them, almost filling up between the rows, clearing away enough in front of the entrance for the bees to take a flight when the weather permits. This protection keeps them quiet, and storms beat on the shelter and on the millet hay. Of course, this is not a waterproof shelter or cover, and I do not think one is needed. It is advantageous to have an opening in the apex of the roof. This plan of having one roof higher than the other secures it with the least expense. It is curious to notice how the bees fly out of these spaces marked AA, as both ends are open, while the operator's manipulating the hives. 16 boards, 14 feet long and 1 foot wide, cover it, and with the 9 posts and 4 2x4 studding to set the hives on, and short pieces to set on top of the posts to nail the roof to, complete the lumber bill. Honeywell, Missouri. End of section 3. Section 4 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stevens. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Foul Brood and Its Causes, by H. L. Jeffrey. You ask for my observations on foul brood regarding the cases noted in the Bee Journal. There are many who, I know, will disagree with me, but, nevertheless, it seemed to come from no other source. The largest case of it was 25 colonies in one apiary. Ever since the year 1873, they had been wintered in the cellar in a sort of room fitted up especially for them. They were usually put in about November 25th and taken out about April the 1st to the 20th, according to the season. This receptacle was directly under the living room, which was kept very warm. The bee room was generally quite dry, and towards spring would stand from 45 degrees to 50 degrees, which would let the bees have from 60 degrees to 80 degrees in the hive, or perhaps 90 degrees, causing the cluster to spread. And there was always a good supply of brood in the combs when taken from the cellar, and generally a considerable number of young hatched bees. So far everything was as good as could be asked for, and every good beekeeper will say this could not have anything to do with foul brood. Perhaps not. These same hives, with more space and more surface of comb than a 10-frame Langstroth hive gives, were put into the cellar with all their combs in place, with a box 6 inches deep below the hive, and another above filled with straw, or with a top story filled with rags, old clothes, and pieces of carpet or straw. The full complement of combs was left in the hives, regardless of the strength of the colonies, and they were then set on their summer stands without using division boards or any contraction of combs. After setting out, they were generally fed liberally every night to induce breeding, which is a good plan if properly handled, but in this case it helped to breed the disease, and it did do it to the fullest extent. Why? First, a small colony should not be given any more combs than it can cover, either in summer or winter. If the hive is too large, insert a division at one or both ends. If on both sides, let one of them be at least half an inch shallower than the hive. Then, if the numbers increase, they can crowd outside of it. Second, if they are wintered indoors, in a hive full of combs, take away all you can before they are set out in the spring, even if you have to feed to prevent starvation. Third, if you do winter indoors, on a full set of combs, do not commence feeding regularly to induce breeding, as soon as set out, though it be the 25th of April or even the 1st of May. In the case mentioned, the consequences were, in the weak colonies, some of the bees died in the combs and contracted some moisture, consequently went mould. Some strong colonies would do the same, but many of the dead bees would be thrown down. The cellar had a drain 100 feet long, with a fall of 5 feet to keep the cellar dry, and a ventilator 3 feet above the house sill outside at the south. The ventilator opened on warm days, consequently a draught of warm air, fire in the room above, temperature in the bee cellar raised, cluster of bees spread. Queen goes to laying, honey consumed, brood reared, and old bees wearing out. All of these conditions are the requisites of good, strong, healthy colonies, and they are just as surely the forerunners of first-class cases of foul brood every time. I know that 99 out of every 100 beekeepers will differ with me, but go through the colonies with me 10 or 15 days after setting out on the summer stands. Suppose in that time we have had 2 or 3 good flying days, the feeding induced the queen to lay more rapidly and forced the cluster to spread. The eggs hatched into larvae. On the pleasant days the old bees flew out, but forgot to fly in again, thus diminishing the cluster. Then there came 2 or 3 stormy days in succession, cold and chilling. The cluster contracted as well as diminished in numbers. The minute larvae starved and dead, and some, perhaps, that are advanced to capping, another flying day, and their numbers are more reduced. The dead bees in the combs putrefy, and you have for your pains a first-class case of foul brood in the near future. Many will shake their heads, but I saw the colonies, and in 3 years I saw the 25, and their increase decreased to 17, the 17, and their increase decreased to 9, the 9 down to 2, and the 2 went in the spring of 1880, where the woodbine twineth. Woodbury, Connecticut, February 26, 1881. End of section 4. Section 5 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stevens. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by various. Early Importations of Italian Bees, by the Reverend L. L. Langstroth. I can probably give, better than anyone living, the history of the first efforts made to introduce Italian bees into this country, as I knew well the late Messrs. Samuel Wagner and Richard Colvin, and Messrs. S. B. Parsons and P. G. Mahan, who, with myself, were the first to import them. Messrs. Wagner and Edward Jessup, both residents of York, Pennsylvania, received from de Ceylon in 1856 a colony of Italian bees which had starved on shipboard. Mr. Wagner's letter to me, August 1856, and given the next spring in my second edition on bees, is the earliest notice published in this country of the Italian race of bees. Messrs. Wagner and Colvin subsequently bought a few queens of de Ceylon, which were consigned to the care of the surgeon of a Bremen steamship, who had been carefully taught what precautions to use for their safety. Fearing that the bees might sting his passengers, the captain would not allow them to be put on his vessel. In the winter of 1858-59, I quote from Mr. Colvin's able article on beekings in the report of the Commissioner of Agriculture for 1863, page 530, another attempt was made by Mr. Wagner, Reverend L. L. Langstroth, and myself. The order was placed in the hands of the surgeon of the steamer, to whose charge the bees were to have been committed, but in consequence of his determining to leave the ship, the effort failed. Subsequently, arrangements were made in the latter part of that year, and we received 7 living queens. Only 2 or 3 young queens were reared by us during that fall and winter, and in the following spring we found that all our imported stock had perished. In conjunction with Mr. Wagner, I determined to make another trial, The queens, however, did not arrive until June 1860. Footnote: Mr. Colvin, having formed the acquaintance of the German captain, not only convinced him that the bees could not escape to injure anybody, but inspired him with a strong desire to be the first to bring over in his own vessel this valuable race of bees. It would require quite a volume to tell, at length, what sacrifices of time were made by Messrs. Wagner and Colvin to secure these bees. End footnote. Our queens, which came in 1859, were in charge of a German resident of Brooklyn, New York, who was returning home from a visit to his friends, and to whom Mr. Wagner had given very careful directions how to care for them. This person, learning that Mr. Mahan had expressed the intention of having the honour of landing in America the first living Italian bees, and desiring, as he told me, to secure this honour for us, communicated Mr. Mahan's intention to the captain, who, as soon as the gangway was in place, was the very first person to step ashore, proclaiming with a very loud voice, "These are the first Italian bees ever landed on the shores of America." In the spring of 1856, Mr. S.B. Parsons of Flushing, L.I., invited me to visit him, and advise with him as to the best way of managing his Italian bees. On my way, I called upon Mr. Mahan, who was joint owner with me of a large interest in my patent hive. He gave me a very graphic account of his visit to the apiary of the Baron von Berlepsch, from whom he obtained a queen, and supplied me with a few Italian workers for Professor Joseph Liddy, that he might determine how the length of the proboscis in that variety compared with that of the black bee. On arriving at Flushing, Mr. Parsons showed me 5 hollow logs, or gums, placed in an old bee shed. It was a warm, sunshiny day, and I saw only an occasional bee flying out from one of the hives. These colonies had been purchased in Italy, carried safely on the backs of mules over the Alpine passes to Genoa, from which port they were safely shipped to New York. But by a succession of mishaps, 4 of them died at Flushing. The 5th contained a mere handful of bees with their queen, which I introduced to a colony of black bees. It is hardly necessary to say that none of these hives were ever in the same vessel with Mr. Mahan. On the 18th of April, the steamer Argo arrived in New York, after a tedious and stormy voyage. Mr. Hermann, a German beekeeper and author of a work on the Italian bee, who had been furnished with a large sum of money by Mr. Parsons to buy Italian bees in the best districts of Italy, and who had agreed to bring them over in the original hives and breed queens for Mr. Parsons, was not on board, but in his place a young Austrian by the name of Bodmer. On the 19th, as soon as the bees were allowed to be landed, they were carried to Flushing. The small boxes in which they were put up were in 3 different packages, one of which was consigned to the U.S. government, one to Mr. Mahan, and one to Mr. Parsons, as the Austrian said that he knew by examination on shipboard that the bees were in very bad condition, and many of them already dead, and, as the day was very pleasant, they were all examined under my personal supervision, and I can assure Mr. Robinson that every colony consigned to the government and Mr. Mahan was dead. A few only of those marked for Mr. Parsons had living queens, some of which soon died, and in a short time he found himself the possessor of only 2 queens, one of which was the queen found alive upon my arrival at Flushing. By my advice, Mr. William W. Carey of Coleraine, Massachusetts, a very skilful beekeeper and a thoroughly trustworthy man, was sent for by Mr. Parsons. One of the queens was entrusted to his care, on the premises of Mr. Parsons, and the other to Mr. Bodmer, some distance off, who did not raise queens enough even to pay for the black bees and honey which were purchased for his use, while Mr. Carey Italianized a large apiary for Mr. Parsons, besides filling all his orders for queens. 111 queens were carried to California by Mr. A.J. Biglow, 108 of which reached there in good condition. This small percent of lost was in part owing to the skilful supervision of Mr. Biglow, and the purifying flight which, by my advice, he gave them on the Isthmus of Panama, but all his precautions would have been of no avail but for the judicious way in which they were prepared by Mr. Carey and himself for so long a voyage. The bees sent to Mr. Parsons were in cigar boxes, into which the combs were merely crowded or wedged. The loosening of the combs on so rough a voyage killed some of the queens, while others were drowned with their bees in honey, and others still starved from the boxes being overcrowded with bees. It is hardly necessary to contrast Mr. Bigelow's success with the heavy losses sustained for years by those who imported bees from Europe. The result of Mr. Parsons' dealing with Herman were that for $1,200 advanced to him, he had only 2 queens to show. The next season, Mr. Bodmer, having learned how to pack bees for a sea voyage, brought over a number of queens in good condition for Mr. E. W. Rose, but was very unfortunate in the management of them. Herman came, some years after, to this country, and was employed by a friend of mine in Philadelphia to purchase for him, in Italy, a large number of queens. The return voyage was long and stormy, and every queen died on board the steamer. Oxford, Ohio, March 5th, 1881. End of section 5. Section 6 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Adrian Stevens. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. A Good Way to Promote Beekeeping, by William F. Clark. As a sample of what may be done in many parts of the country to diffuse knowledge regarding apiculture and awaken an interest in beekeeping as a business, let me give a brief account of a meeting recently held in Shaftesbury Hall, Toronto, under the auspices of the YMCA. Mr. D. A. Jones, having made the acquaintance of some of the leading spirits in the organization just named, offered to give a free lecture on beekeeping. The offer was accepted, and a meeting announced to which the members of the YMCA were admitted gratis, while the general public were charged a small fee. Mr. Jones invited the writer to be present as a reserve force in case he should break down, and what enthusiastic beekeeper would not rally to the rescue when thus appealed to? Unfortunately, Mr. J. was not in good trim, having been sick enough to keep his bed most of the day preceding the lecture evening. However, he gathered himself up for the task he had undertaken, was cheered by the appearance of his ally just as the lecture was about to begin. For a sick man he did bravely, and spoke for nearly an hour. His remarks were, of course, general, and very different from what they would have been if his audience had been composed of experienced apiarists. He discoursed on beekeeping as a business, explained the outlines of it, showed that it was profitable, and especially dwelt upon the gain which would accrue to the country if it were more generally engaged in. An interesting sketch of his journey to Cyprus and the Holy Land formed the latter part of his address. The writer supplemented his remarks by a talk of about half an hour, the chief theme of which was advice to intending beekeepers. There was a far larger audience than might have been expected, considering the prevalent apathy in regard to apicultural pursuits, and considering also that the weather was unpleasantly stormy. Much interest was evidently awakened. A number of questions were asked at the close of the address, and many lingered when the meetin' was out to talk about bee matters. An immense amount of good might be done if practical beekeepers would engage in this kind of missionary work. The public is a dull scholar and needs to be enthused by men who have the true apicultural spirit. Among other questions, these were asked: "What is the best bee journal?" and "What is the best book on beekeeping?" "The American Bee Journal and Cook's Manual," were the replies given. In his counsels to beginners, the writer insisted very strongly that the first step in practical beekeeping was to get a good handbook and journal of apiculture. So if you receive orders from Toronto for the American Bee Journal and manual, you may give Jones's meeting the credit for having inspired them. There are not only YMCAs, but other organisations all over the land that would be glad to have a meeting in the interest of beekeeping. If 2 or 3 practical beekeepers would divide the work and responsibility for maintaining such a meeting, it would not be so formidable as though only one man undertook it. A plain common-sense talk on a subject of such practical and commercial importance as beekeeping would be a welcome change from the elaborate lectures usually delivered before YMCAs, lyceums and bodies of that ilk. I hope Jones's enthusiastic zeal will stir others up to emulation and imitation. Reader, if conscious of possessing the gift of the gab in any degree, go thou and do likewise. Listowel, Ontario, March the 7th, 1881. End of section 6.
Section 7 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Do Bees Injure Fruit? By F.P. Boteler. A prominent wine grower in this country told me about a year ago that he did not want bees in his neighborhood as he found they injured his grape crop. As I have a small grapery of about 100 plants, between the rows of which I find shelter for about 20 colonies of bees, I determined to observe if his theory was correct, for I was loath to give up either. If any fruit crop could be injured by the visit of bees, mine is surely the one. The result of one season's close observation has convinced me, first, that bees promote rather than injure the foundation of fruit buds, because the bunches on my vines were full with better developed berries than those produced on vines less exposed to their visits, and my peach and cherry trees were as fairly loaded with fruit as they well could be. Second, that in the fall bees only visit our ripe berries that have been sweetened by early frosts and are very rarely seen on good sound fruit when the skin is unbroken, and that the loss from this cause is of very little consequence, as the fruit attacked would fall off itself without the visit of the bees before gathering. I am wintering 21 colonies, mostly Italian, procured one of Jones' Siberian queens, but too late in the fall to speak intelligently of the result. They are on summer stands, well sheltered and surrounded with straw, having means of exit, and I think are wintering well, but they have not had a good flight since early in November. Billy River, Ontario, March 5th, 1881. End of section 7. Recorded by Tariq Al-Yahya.
Section 8 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Buchanan. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Remarkable Tardiness and Fecundity, by G. W. Demery. One of my Cyprian queens has upset an established doctrine in bee science, set at naught all the bee books, and reversed the old adage which says, "Hope long deferred maketh the heart sick." In the latter part of last season I reared some Cyprian queens from eggs and larvae, obtained from Mr. Root. They were 7 in number, and were hatched on the 6th, 7th, and 8th days of September. The weather being warm and fair, they were all fertilized, except one which never returned from her bridal tour, by the 12th of the month, and a few days later they were all laying, except one, that being the finest, brightest-looking queen of the lot stubbornly refused to commence the duties of a good queen. She was in a strong nucleus which was fed regularly and bountifully, till the hive looked as though the occupants were enjoying a bountiful white clover harvest. But nary an egg would she lay. She was provided with clean, empty comb, placed in the center of the colony, and the feeding kept up till winter set in. But no brood appeared. The hive was not opened from the time it was prepared for winter, say November 15, till the middle of December, at which time there was not a sign of brood. Then came the long siege of snow and bitter winds which lasted till the 30th of January. On that date our bees enjoyed a good cleansing flight, and I remembered my non-laying queen, and proceeded to look her combs over, and to my surprise, on one of the center combs I found a little patch of brood, about half as large as a postal card, some of which was sealed over. It was genuine worker brood, and no mistake, since which time she has been laying nicely, and now has a nice lot of brood for the time of year. My bees, 30 colonies with selected queens, have come safely through the winter to the 1st of March, and there is really but little danger of losing bees in this climate after the 1st of this month, unless they are short of stores and shamefully neglected. The bee-man is aware, above all others, that there is many a slip betwixt the cup and the lip, however closely he may watch his business. On the 30th of January last, when my bees were flying lively, I noticed that one large colony with a tested Cyprian queen were not stirring like the others. I proceeded to open the hive, and found the bees so nearly starved that they could only show signs of life by a feeble motion of their wings, which produced no sound whatever. Not a bee seemed able to change its position. The forerunner of death was already present in the form of a cold, damp atmosphere in the brood chamber. I prepared some rich sweetened water, separated the frames gently, and sprinkled the bees thoroughly with the sweetened water, and poured some of it into the empty cells. The frames were then readjusted, and a dry woolen quilt spread over the bees, and the sun permitted to shine into the hive. In about an hour I raised the quilt, and the inmates of the hive were stirring briskly, handing around the good cheer, while some of them showed fight in a most patriotic style. They were provided with stores, and are now a number 1 colony. So much for bee science. What a lesson this teaches! Here was a large colony of bees perishing with famine as one single individual. So unselfishly had they divided their family stores amongst themselves that when relief did come, though not till their dire extremity, there was no practical loss of life. Before I close, I cannot resist the temptation to tell how my bees have been carrying in meal and prancing gaily on the alighting boards with their white pellets exposed to the best advantage. Christiansburg, Kentucky. End of recording. End of Section 8. Recording by Grace Buchanan.
Section 9 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Honey producing in California. by W. A. Pryall. No doubt, but by this time many of the Eastern beekeepers are looking to this far-off land of milk and honey, as of late years it has been called. Perhaps the reason is partially because here abundant warm rains have fallen all over the state, and the world-renowned honey region has received its complement of the downpour. In fact, the inhabitants hardly ever saw so much rain visit that section at the right time. There are now signs, however, that indicate the sun will shine with its usual brightness, that those delightful spring days which are so peculiar to this fair land are about to favor us. Let this be the case, and the bees will soon be flying out by thousands, and the willow blossoms will each and all receive a welcome visit from those industrious insects. Their journeying will not be confined to the banks of the creeks where the willows grow, but the woodlands where the Australian blue gum, Eucalyptus gulopulus, has been planted by the hand of man, and which hold out its bounteous chalice for the busy bee to come and sip of nectar deep and sweet. While the loss in bees will in all probability be great in the states east of the Rocky Mountain, here the loss, if any, will not be quite as bad as it has been other years. Thus it will be seen our eastern brethren will have to commence the season with greatly reduced forces, while the apiarists in this state will commence operations with more colonies, and consequently with more bees. Last season was a good one, and the bees went into winter quarters with abundant stores, which have carried them through the mild winter safely. The bee flora, having had ample rains to ensure a most thrifty growth, will bloom for a longer period than it has heretofore, and of course will ensure an enormous yield of honey. On account of the long continuance of the rain, but a few flowers have commenced to bloom. Still the plants are growing, and when they do commence, they will be able to do so in a vigorous manner. A few of those now blooming are the willows in variety, Eucalyptus gulopulus, and it is usually covered with flowers. Wild currant, a pretty fair honey plant, but scarce. Wild gooseberry, wild blackberry, just beginning. Raspberry, ditto, almond, pear, and peach, mignonette, horehound, and a few others, all of which give the bees more than they can do to gather the nectar and pollen. North Temescal, California, February 17th, 1881. End of section 9. Read to you by Tariq Al-Yahya.
Section 10 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Grace Buchanan. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Beemen to the Front, by A. W. Fisk. The present may be called trying times to beekeepers of America. Poor honey seasons, hard winters, and the nefarious warfare against the honey producers of this country in the vile adulteration of honey is indeed trying, discouraging, and diabolical. It appears by the papers that these glucose scoundrels are not satisfied with adulterating extracted honey, but according to this article that I clipped from one of our papers, the Bushnell Record, they are manufacturing comb honey. It reads as follows. Many singular discoveries have been made among manufacturers by the census enumerators in the course of their investigations. For instance, it has been long known that dealers are in the habit of adulterating honey with glucose on the plea of thus improving its keeping qualities. In Boston, however, there is a firm doing a large business in making honey entirely from glucose, much in the same way as manufacturers elsewhere make butter from suin and oleomargarine. The comb is molded out of paraffin in excellent imitation of the work of bees. Then the cells are filled with clear glucose and sealed by passing a hot iron over them, and the product is sent to Europe as our best honey. The busiest Italian bees couldn't compete with this firm in turning out honey, any more than could a Eurotas-like Jersey breed compete in butter-making with our deft manipulators of lard and tallow. Now, brother bee-men, I believe the time has arrived when this honey counterfeiting should be stopped. I therefore suggest that the bee-men of this country come up in solid phalanx to the front, and with President N.P. Allen and the bee paper editors as leaders, let us agitate the question, educate the people, stir up the press, wake up the country, and vote or petition to Congress until we secure the passage of a law by Congress against the adulteration of honey, sugar, syrup, or food of any kind. Many of the leading journals of our land are battling for the right in this matter. The Burlington, Iowa Hawkeye last week expressed itself as follows. It is time that stringent legislative enactments are passed, making the adulteration of so many articles of food a criminal offense, punishable by severe penalties. If these things must be done to gratify the inordinate greed of some men, let it be made obligatory on them that the packages containing spurious products so proclaim them under penalty of confiscation when detected, and the fraud further punishable by heavy penalty. No man has any right to sell a compound of honey and glucose as pure honey, nor has he any right, either moral or legal, to place a compound of butter and lard, still further doctored with drugs, upon the market as pure butter. If adulterations of food are allowed to go on in this way, unrebuked, there is not an article of food known that will not be counterfeited, and oftentimes with substances very hurtful in character. I am thankful so many are lending their aid and influence in the cause of justice and humanity, but we want the united efforts of honest beekeepers and consumers and fair dealers to make a bold front against every adulterator and to expose him to the world. In this way, I believe the problem can be solved and the evil remedied. Bushnell, Illinois. So far as it refers to the adulteration of comb honey, it is a false alarm. All bosh. We alluded to this subject more at length on page 44 of the Bee Journal for February 9th. We are glad, however, to see the interest being awakened on the subject of food adulterations, and beekeepers, as well as all other honest producers, cannot be too outspoken in denouncing it. Editors. End of recording. End of Section 10. Recording by Grace Buchanan.
Section 11 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. The In and In Breeding of Bees, by M.S. Snow. Mr. C. Thielman in the Bee Journal says he has bees which are mostly hybrids, and he does not know where they came from, but there are Italians 5 miles from him. Another says he has no black bees, and his queens must be purely mated. Another that a neighbor has had some 10 or 15 colonies so many years breeding in and in, but states he managed to keep his numbers about the same. Breeding in and in with bees, I am fully convinced, is not much done. Bees are free rovers, and it seems to be their nature or instincts to mate at some distance from their parent hive. This question was discussed by one of the speakers at a bee convention in New York some years ago. He claimed that in and in breeding had a great deal to do with the failures in beekeeping. He compared an apiary to a yard of fowls in this respect, and that they could be bred in and in until entirely worthless. This may be done, for fowls are confined to a particular locality, But how is it with prairie chickens? What is the reason they do not degenerate and run out? Because they are rovers like the bee and are mated by others from some remote part. I claim that bees will mix from 5 to 7 miles, and if there are 50 or 100 colonies within that distance, the progeny of a certain queen will stand a poor show of mating with drones from its own hive. To illustrate, while living in New York, I obtained one of Mr. Langstroth's $20 tested Italian queens. I reared some 70 queens and introduced them into as many colonies. The next season I had Italian drones by the thousand. My stock of Italian drones were the only ones in the locality, so I had a good chance to test breeding in and in. The next season, and even that fall, there were hybrid colonies all over the country, even at the distance of 7 miles. One man had one colony. One man 5 miles from me wished me to introduce an Italian queen into one of his colonies. I think he had 6, and I was surprised to see 4 of them hybrids. How they came there he did not know. Others said to me, I have your kind of bees, but where they came from I cannot tell. All breeders of Italian queens find it very difficult to keep their stock up to the standard of purity. I obtained $5 queens, Italians, from a breeder in New York, which when tested proved to be hybrids, showing conclusively that there were black bees in that section. Osakis, Minnesota. End of section 11. Read to you by Tariq Al-Yahya.
Section 12 of The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Calvin Moyson, Dallas, Texas. www.moi.code. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. How to Prevent Robbing, by J. D. Ennis. My location for surplus honey is not as good as some other sections of the state, and from the middle of June to the last of July, from 4 to 6 weeks, there appears to be no honey flow, and the weather being hot and dry scorches what bloom is left soon after June comes in. Our last rain is in April or sometimes late in May, and no more generally before October or November. All kinds of stock depending on pasture, especially in the hills, suffer at this time. When bees can gather no honey, Italians especially go about visiting for the purpose of plunder, and woe to the colony that is not strong enough to defend its stores. I have reduced the entrance, covered the entrance with cow chips, wet hay, brush, and in fact tried all remedies that ever I saw in print or heard of without success. While the robbers were helping themselves, the colony robbed was not discouraged, but appeared to be robbing some other, and the queen was laying eggs to be starved as they advanced to brood. No bees appeared to be killed at the entrance, as no blacks were about. They were all Italians, and they can rob when they get started. I exchanged the places of the hives without success, until I thought of changing after dark. So while they were robbing, I went to all colonies that appeared to be quiet and minding their own business, and placed a single stone on the cover. Then on those that were getting robbed the worst, I placed 2 stones. Then, when so dark that no bees were flying, I exchanged places and put a strong colony on the stand of a weak one. Sometimes I had to repeat this, but not always. Some of those weak ones filled their hives with goldenrod honey, and robbing was stopped for that season. It was amusing to see the robbers when those strong colonies had fairly awakened, to know that they had callers. They mustered out at the entrance solid and were ready for business. The robber seemed to think he had made a mistake. The strong colony had not got discouraged. The robbers could not force the entrance, and the weak colony, not in a fighting humor, received the recruits from the strong one, which were a little too surprised at the change to interfere with the queen and inmates. Most of the old bees would go to their own stand, but in the confusion of things they would gradually be at home in their own hive. I found the plan very successful, when closing the entrance did not do. I extracted as late as June 10 to keep down swarming. Last spring my Italians took the grafting wax from my peach grafts. I also observed them gathering the worm dust from decayed oak wood, and filling their pockets instead of pollen about Christmas. In the valley 2 miles from here, frost was quite severe, but the mercury got below 32 degrees only twice. The lowest was 28 degrees. Natural bloom was 2 months behind, owing to early frosts which appeared to drive the sap down to the roots. Napa, California. End of section 12. Section 13 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Calvin Moyson, Dallas, Texas. www.moi.codes. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Bees Killed by Kindness, by B. F. Whitaker. I commenced the year 1875 with 12 box hives and engaged my brother to hive the colonies in movable frame hives on shares. But the bees swarmed faster than he had the hives ready. One swarmed 5 times in 1 week. In the fall I had 16 colonies in movable frame and 20 in box hives. I prepared them for winter by cutting up a light bed quilt to cover the frames, drove stakes about a foot from the hives all around except in the front, which faced the south, and packed straw in the spaces and filled the cap with chaff and straw, and covered the hives with straw. In the spring but 1 colony was living, and that was in a box hive. The quilts were laid down flat on the frames, leaving no ventilation. When it became cold, the bees died and fell on the bottom board, filling up the spaces between the frames. The moisture fell on the bees and froze solid, closing the entrance so that I could not open it, even with an iron rod. In the corners of each hive was a chunk of ice, running halfway up the frames. The bees cut holes through the quilts, and when they could, had crawled into the straw and died. This was murder. But such was my experience in 1875-6. Florida, Illinois, March 1st, 1881. We have no doubt your first disasters were attributed altogether to a too rapid increase. Editor. End of section 13. Section 14 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Calvin Moyson, Dallas, Texas. www.moi.codes. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Watchman, tell us of the night. Can you not recommend some reliable prophet who will prophesy good weather soon? The storm is terrible. Not a road in the county is passable for half a mile. The drifts are as high as the fences and the snow full 3 feet on the level. Bees are getting uneasy and must have a flight soon. Many report heavy losses even now. Others complain that all are sick with dysentery. In my home cellar, out of about 275, 4 are slightly affected. The balance are apparently in good condition. My outside apiaries fare worse. 2 weeks ago, quite a number had the dysentery slightly. I should judge about 8 or 10%. How they now are, I cannot tell. Certainly no better. I believe that they can stand it a month longer, and my home apiary 6 weeks, but that is the limit. We are all afraid that Venner's prophecy of 11 feet of snow will yet be realized unless someone can be found to contradict it. 11 feet of snow now would last us until all our bees had died a natural death from old age. Help us out of our troubles if you can. Geo Grimm. Jefferson, Wisconsin, March 3rd, 1881. It was with much pleasure we noticed in last Thursday's Associated Press dispatches evidences of Professor Venner's reformation. He undoubtedly has become convinced that the realization of the 11 feet of snow attributed to his prophecies would not only cause much suffering and privation with the majority of humanity, but work serious and permanent injury to the country itself. He has relented, or probably been bribed by Mr. McComb's liberal offer in the Bee Journal of March 2, page 69, and now promises us better weather in the future. His latest prediction is a reasonably early, warm, dry spring, cool, pleasant summer, and late, dry fall, followed by a mild and pleasant winter. Of course, he promises abundant crops and a satisfactory remunerative harvest. But without any further reference to Professor Venner, and without laying any claim to the spirit of prophecy, we believe the coming season will be a very satisfactory one to those beekeepers who may be prepared to profit by it, and who have the industry and intelligence to make the most of it. The winter of 1879 to 80 was very mild and open. The scarcity of snow left the earth's surface exposed alike to freezing temperature of night and the pleasant sunshine of the balmy days. Spring-like showers were of frequent occurrence, and heavy rains accompanied with thunder were so numerous that they ceased to create surprise, while the weird spring music of the frogs was a familiar sound every month and nearly every week throughout the winter. The alternating cold and heat threw out the roots of the perennial plants, breaking off the long, deep-reaching taps and killing the rootlets. Hence the frequent expression, but little white clover in bloom and no honey in the blossoms. The honey-producing annuals have done but little better, owing, we presume, to the germination of the seeds in midwinter, and the frequent frosting of the tender sprouts before spring set in. Thus the summer and fall bloom was limited, and no provision having been made to supply the shortcomings of nature, bees entered upon an unprecedented winter with a poor supply of good, or a good supply of poor, honey. The many empty hives in the country this spring is the result. The past winter, whatever else may be said of it, has been propitious for the honey plants. Cool weather in this latitude set in during October. Vegetation was checked in the perennials and biennials. The ground was frozen in November, and it was overspread with a mantle of snow quite early in the season, which has constantly held the roots of the perennials in position, and prevented the seeds of the annuals from unseasonable germination. The stand of white clover last fall was good, and mostly of quite recent growth, which should bloom profusely this season and will only need heat and favorable sunshine to develop the nectar. The causes enumerated will also tend to confine the vitality of the linden trees to the roots, to be drawn out in profuse foliage and bloom by the genial rays of the summer sun. The numerous variety of flowers, we believe, will gratify the eye of every lover of the beautiful in nature, and well reward the labors of the painstaking beekeeper. That the price of honey will be remunerative next fall no one can doubt. In view of the lessened competition, owing to the heavy losses this past winter and the many who will utilize the bees they have left to refilling their empty hives, it would take more space than we can give a single article to explain why we have much confidence in Professor Venner's latest prediction, referred to above, though perhaps the wish is father to the thought. We feel confident many of our readers will cordially unite with us in welcoming the better time coming. End of section 14. Section 15 of The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Calvin Moyson, Dallas, Texas. www.moi.codes. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Migratory Bee-Keeping. Why do not the enterprising beekeepers of these parts go south with their bees and wait till the March blizzards are over? Seems to me the bees and honey saved would about pay the expenses of the trip. How much does a colony need in those parts to winter on? Would there be any prospect of obtaining any surplus down there before the season opens here? These and a dozen other questions I am vainly speculating upon. Are Messrs. Bingham and Perrin the only ones that have tried the migratory plan? I believe neither of them was successful. At any rate, they have abandoned it. Probably they could not give it the necessary attention. The loss of larvae in shipping seems but trifling compared to the gain in young bees. Considerable damage may be done by combs breaking down, but wired frames would obviate that difficulty. Is not wired foundation, wired in frames, the only kind that can be depended on under all circumstances? You report in the October number, 1880, page 468, that the Northwestern Convention disapproved of wired foundation. There were but few present that had given wired foundation a fair trial, and if I'm not mistaken, they were strongly in favor of it. H. W. Funk, Bloomington, Illinois, March 5th, 1881. The first question is difficult to answer, as enterprising beekeepers, like the balance of humanity, are generally governed by motives of convenience or profit. There are very few but have other business connected with beekeeping, and this would suffer if close attention was given the migratory system. The amount of honey required to winter in the south is much less than in the north, but the quantity is governed by contingencies, as would be the question, how much honey will a colony obtain in the south in a season? Usually bees obtain considerable surplus in April and May in some localities. Mr. Bingham, we believe, abandoned the migratory system on account of excessive freights, while Mr. Perrin met with a series of disasters from the first which would have discouraged anyone. Mr. W. O. Abbott was engaged last season with a floating apiary on the Mississippi River, from which large returns were anticipated, but as nothing definite has been made public since the close of the season, we suppose it was not a success. Others have tried southern wintering, but we have no data upon which to base conclusions, except the fact of its abandonment. The trouble has not been so much from destruction of combs as the expense attending the removal. A private letter from a gentleman with several hundred colonies of bees located a short distance below Memphis, Tennessee, dated March 5th, says, "My colonies are mostly very strong. They are bringing in 5 kinds of pollen. Many are clustering in front of their hives. Most of them had large quantities of honey left over, and I could extract an average of 15 pounds per colony with profit to the bees. Bees here are given no attention in the fall, but are left on the summer stands, sometimes with the second story over them, and often with only a honey board. Frequently there are entrances at front and rear, and wide cracks in the sides from which bees pour out. But disaster never overtakes them except from starvation. If a necessity exists for wires and foundation, then perhaps the wired frames are best. That but few of those in attendance at the Northwestern Convention had given wired foundation a fair trial was undoubtedly owing to the fact that the great majority of those present had never experienced the necessity for using wires, and it might be difficult to convince a considerable minority of the beekeepers in the country that wired foundation is even desirable for general use. Of course, for special purposes, such as migratory beekeeping, shipping in summer, etc., where not to be transferred from the frames, wired frames might be very desirable. End of section 15.
Section 16 of The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Avai in March 2021. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. By Various. Interesting letter from Ceylon. Through the courtesy of Mr. D. A. Jones, we are permitted to publish the following letter. Anything related to the peregrinations of Mr. Benton in the Far East, and any discoveries of new races of bees that he may effect, will possess a great attraction for our readers. His next letter from Singapore will be awaited with interest. I found on examination that every queen was alive upon my arrival in Pointe de Galle, though some of the nuclei were greatly depopulated, owing to the death of many bees, and would not have lived to reach Java had I not gotten off in Ceylon. By the next steamer I go to Singapore. I have made every effort to secure bees here, but none are kept in hives in those ports I have visited, and I do not think in any port of the island. Of those found in trees, few can be secured, because the trees are valuable coconut palms, and the entrance holes are in the trunk, of course, and are very small. I have obtained 3 hives only of the small bees, having also spent some time fixing up the bees I brought with me, and trying to find the large bees, to say nothing of searching for some place where bees could be purchased in hives or pots. The natives are far worse than Cypriots to get along with and accomplish anything. They seem to tell lies simply for the sake of giving an answer, where no pecuniary gain could come to them. Again, they seem to wish to avoid saying, "I do not know," when the Lord knows it would be the most appropriate thing for them to say in 99 cases out of 100. The result is that it is hard work to sift the statements made by the natives, and Europeans, nearly all English, know absolutely nothing of value to us. The new bees, which I think are also found in India and many of the East India Islands, in which case East India bees would seem to me an appropriate name, are real beauties. The workers are 3/8 of an inch long, and build worker comb 5/8 of an inch thick, 36 cells to the square inch. The drone comb is exactly the size, and like worker comb made by the bees already in Europe and America. The workers are brown with a very ringed abdomen, the bands to the tip of the body being broadly marked with yellow, and thorax very fuzzy, with a large shield between the wings. The drones are black, inclining to a blue-black, and are 1/2 of an inch long. The queens are leather-colored and large compared with the workers. These bees are very active, wonderful breeders, regular little beauties, and can be handled without the least smoke, scarcely ever offering to sting. It is a pity I cannot get more of them during my stay. I am determined to find out whether Apis dorsata is to be found here, if time will permit, and if 2 more races I have heard of here really do exist. I am now where a few shillings of railway fare will bring me into the interior of the island. More by next mail, with samples of bees and comb. I have had a horrible time getting stung with large hornets while in the jungles. It laid me up for 1 whole day. These are fearful fellows, worse than those in Cyprus. F. Benton, Colombo, Ceylon, January 24th, 1881. There are 5 Wednesdays in March, hence the next number sent to semi-monthly subscribers will be number 14. We can supply but a few more of the back numbers to new subscribers. If any want them, they must be sent for soon. One letter sometimes makes quite a difference in the meaning of a sentence. Mr. L. James calls attention to an error in his article on page 34, in the 4th line from the bottom. The word hiving is there given as hiding. As the sense indicated the word required, perhaps it was not generally noticed. The past week has been noted for snowstorms, not only in America but also in Europe, where a winter of unusual severity is reported, with deep snows and steady frosts for months together. This winter will have a place in history as being among the most severe as well as of the longest duration. Not alone have the bees suffered by it, but cattle, sheep, hogs, etc. have perished by the thousands from the prevalence of blizzards and deep snows. Several beekeepers in this vicinity are considering the feasibility of holding a convention in Detroit this spring. The law in regard to foul brood, which is about to be passed, makes an organization necessary. It is desirable to know how many would favor the enterprise. With such, please send me their address. A.B. Weed, number 75 Bank Street, Detroit, Michigan. End of section 16.
Section 17 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Wilcox Beanie. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Selections from our letterbox. Part 1. Wintered well. I have wintered 40 colonies of Italians on the summer stands. They have wintered well. James H. Davis, New Holland, Pennsylvania, March 8th, 1881. Mortality reports. It seems to me that the only way of profiting by the experience of beekeepers throughout the country this exceptionally severe winter is to reduce their reports to a tabular statement. If they could be induced to send in these reports in the form of brief answers to questions like the following, we could read the history of the past winter on a single page of the Bee Journal and learn from it lessons of scientific value. I mean such questions as these. 1. How many colonies did you winter? 2. Where? Outdoors or in cellar? 3. What hive did you use? 4. How did you prepare it? 5. What entrance was left open? Bottom, top, or both? 6. How late did the bees breed? 7. How many pounds of honey were they allowed to keep? 8. When did they have their first flight? 9. How many colonies did you lose? C. F. Creux, Hoboken, New Jersey, March 5th, 1881. Editor's note. It would be difficult to get up a reliable report of this kind for many reasons. Chiefly, perhaps, the following. First, spring does not open simultaneously all over the country, and by the time the last were heard from, the table would have lost its interest. Second, many are sensitive and prefer not to give their experience. Third, many have partially reported already and would scarcely care to do so again. We agree with Mr. Creux. A table of that description would be invaluable for reference, but it is difficult to obtain. 19 weeks confinement. Bees have at last had a purifying flight after 19 weeks confinement. I find 28 dead from 153. I packed in chaff. Temperature has been below 0 7 times, and as low as 17 degrees below this winter. One has had dysentery since December 15th, but is alive yet, with a fair prospect of getting through. H.D. Burrell, Bangor, Michigan, March 10th, 1881. Wintered safely. We had a very poor season last year, and the winter has been very severe. I began the last season with 18 colonies, increased to 34, and obtained about £500 of surplus. I wintered in the cellar and lost 3 colonies with dysentery. My bees had a cleansing flight about 2 weeks ago, and I think we will have no more losses this winter. There are quite a number of beekeepers in this vicinity, but most of them report very heavy losses, some having over 100 colonies, and losing nearly all. We are very much pleased with the Weekly Bee Journal, and I think it far superior to any monthly. L. E. Welch, Linden, Michigan, March 8th, 1881. A slim living. I prepared 21 colonies on December 1st for wintering on summer stands. Hives were sitting on 4-inch blocks, and the colonies were all strong. I placed woolen blankets over the tops of the frames, then the honey boards and covers, and left them for the winter, my usual way. Always heretofore they have come out bright. February 22nd I felt uneasy about them, and being a bright day, I opened the hives to find 11 dead out of 21 colonies, and the remaining 10 weak. The hives were filled with frost and ice, and blankets wet with water. 5 out of the 11 dead had Italian queens, which I purchased from Mr. A. H. Newman last summer. I'm not discouraged. If I had to make a living from bees, it would be slim. I can learn more in 1 week about taking care of bees from the Bee Journal than I could in 1 year without it. Edmund Delaire, Oquito, Kansas, March 1st, 1881. Honey sections. In the Bee Journal of March 2nd, Mr. Hedden says he prefers a section that he can press to any angle and have it solid, but I fail to see that any other angle than square is of any advantage. Again, Mr. H asks, is it not better to wait and see which goes into general use? Perhaps the following figures may show which has gone into general use, at least with our customers. I make any kind that are wanted, and therefore the figures will show which are the most desirable. In 1879, the first year that one-piece sections were put upon the market, and at a higher price than any other kinds, my sales were 104,578 one-piece sections, 124,058 dovetailed, and 38,270 nailed. In 1880, the following are the figures: 233,898 one-piece sections, 47,980 dovetailed, and 50,950 nailed. According to Mr. Hedden's test, therefore, the one-piece sections are the most desirable because they have gone into general use. G. B. Lewis, Watertown, Wisconsin, March 8th, 1881. Bees in good condition. The Weekly Bee Journal is a welcome visitor, and is the first paper I read when I return home on Friday evening. It is a friend that introduces me to my fellow beekeepers and their manner of manipulating our pets. My bees are in good spirits, yet they had but 2 flights this winter. I have them packed in a shed in new Langstroth hives, manipulating sides. They are 6 inches apart and packed all around with straw, excepting the fronts. They face the south, with the division board on each side of the frames, leaving a dead air space. John W. Sturwald, Haymond, Indiana, February 7th, 1881. Wintered without loss. I have kept bees for 7 years, and my greatest trouble has been wintering them, but I think I have that perfect now. I winter on summer stands packed in chaff. Last fall I had 72 colonies, and on February 9th all were right. I think I shall have to feed them. Last fall some had 15 pounds, and others 25 pounds of honey. That is, if the bees and comb weighed 10 pounds. The combs were all new, and it may be that 10 pounds was allowing too much. George Wickwire, Western Mills, New York, March 4th, 1881. Mourning for the bees. It is lamentable to hear the reports throughout this country. Some have lost all, others all but 1 or 2. I think about 4/5 of the bees are dead through this country, as nearly all left their bees unprotected. They had to suffer losses. But I think the present winter will in part decide the best methods of wintering. I started last spring with 4 colonies, increased to 6, but obtained no surplus. In September, I bought 2 Italian colonies, which are doing well. I packed 2 in chaff, and 6 I put into the cellar, but 2 of these died. 1 starved, and the other had the dysentery. Those packed in chaff had a good flight on February 26th. Those in the cellar had no flight since November the 1st. The weather is now breaking up. The snow has nearly all gone, and the roads are muddy. I'm highly pleased with the Weekly Bee Journal. I could not be persuaded to do without it. H. Cripe, North Manchester, Indiana, March 8th, 1881. End of section 17. Recording by John Wilcox Beanie. Section 18 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. beekeeping.org. Recording by John Wilcox Beanie. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. By Various. Selections from our letterbox. Part 2. Wintering. My experience of over 25 years in trying all modes of wintering is as follows. On summer stands and in the cellar for 10 years. I then built a house to winter in. Used that 2 years and then abandoned it. The last 3 years I've been using the chaff hive and winter on summer stands, with the least loss of any way I've tried. My bees had a splendid fly on the 11th, it being the first chance for them since the 8th of November. I think they'll go through all right now, unless we have a very late spring. I prepared 148 colonies for winter, 123 in chaff hives and 25 in the common box hive. I've lost but 1 in chaff hive yet, and 10 in the box hive already, and doubt if 1/2 of what I left will see the middle of April. I wish to congratulate our editor on the success of the Bee Journal. I've received it regular since assuming its new form and think it just splendid. And if I had but 1 colony of bees, I would try to take the weekly Bee Journal to aid me to make a success of that. I hope the editor may be liberally supported by the beekeepers of America, for I believe with his experience and that of his able contributors, he can give us a paper that we cannot afford to do without. J.M. France, Auburn, Pennsylvania, February 24th, 1881. Vexatious to sell honey. I only realised $300 last year from my bees. I put 50 colonies in winter quarters in the fall of 1879, lost none, but doubled up on account of queenlessness, weakness, etc., to 45, all in first-class order. I bought 50 colonies in old-fashioned Langstroth hives. They were wintered in a good cellar and were, with a few exceptions, weak in bees, combs in bad order, short of stores, and badly managed the preceding season. I united them down to 27 before I moved them. At the beginning of honey harvest, basswood bloom, I doubled up to 15, so that when the honey season opened, I had 60 first-class colonies, and obtained 3,500 pounds of summer honey. I extracted only once. I increased by natural swarming to 88, and at the close of the season doubled up to 74. I have lost 1 this winter through my own fault. I winter outdoors, but would winter indoors if I had a proper place. I sell nearly all my honey to the consumers, but confess this is a vexatious way of disposing of it. It is the most annoying part of the business, in fact. I feel disgusted when I think of it. People cry fraud, fraud, when there is no fraud. But when a spurious article is offered, they swallow it as quietly as desired. George W. Horner, Dubuque, Iowa, February 15th, 1881. Prospects better. This has been a fine day. My bees had a cleansing flight today. They are all alive and strong, and seem to be in splendid condition, with plenty of honey and perfectly dry. I think all the danger is over with them now. I'm in favour of double-walled hives, but not packed with chaff, for I've noticed that where there is chaff, there is frost on the inside wall. I prefer a dead air space, for then it is always dry. What is the use of changing black bees for Italians if Mr. Lukes of California can get so much honey from the black bees? They surely must be the boss bees. I think we had better take our bees to California, where milk and honey flows. David Hohenschel, Collins, Illinois, March 6th, 1881. All alive. My bees are all alive and in fine condition. They were wintered out of doors, in shed, packed around with straw, but open to the east. J.R. Mead, Wichita, Kansas, March 7, 1881. Winter yet in Kentucky. Bees are wintering very badly here, and 2 of my neighbours have lost all they had. The ground is covered with snow, and looks as much like winter as it did a month ago. A. E. Foster, Covington, Kentucky, March 5th, 1881. No surplus, nor increase. This has been a hard winter on the bees. I think all that were not protected and those partially protected will die. There was no surplus nor increase here worth mentioning last summer. James Knipe, Spring Prairie, Wisconsin, February 26th, 1881. Great loss of bees. The bees in McDonough County that were wintered on the summer stands are nearly all dead. Those in double-walled hives and those packed in straw dying the same as those in single-walled hives. My loss is about 95 out of 100. S. H. Black, Scioto, Illinois, March 5th, 1881. Bees in prime condition. I have 110 colonies in the cellar in prime condition. Nearly all bees outdoors are dead. C. H. Dibben, Milan, Illinois, March 9th, 1881. Paris Green. It is not very good for bees, as I had an opportunity last spring to find out. I have in my garden a 10-year-old plum tree that never perfected any fruit, and knowing that Paris Green would kill bugs, I thought it might also kill the little Turk, or curculio. Acting upon the suggestion, I mixed some Paris Green in a watering can and put up through the branches of the tree a long ladder, from the top of which I sprinkled the whole top of the tree just before dark, and a day or two before the bloom went off. Next day afternoon, as I was passing through my bee yard, I was very much surprised to see on the ground a good many bees in a dying condition which I could not account for. I came at last, however, to the conclusion that they had gone to the plum tree in the morning before it was dry and partaken of the poison. I lost a good many bees, but I've learned this lesson: never to put Paris Green on trees when in bloom. Still, I am satisfied that by sprinkling or syringing 2 or 3 times, when the plum is in its incipient state, it will ensure a crop. Who will try this spring and report? Geo Thompson, Geneva, Illinois. Making progress. Although behind some other states, yet we have made some progress. Bees seem to do best in the newer counties, where the timber has not been cut off. It might be supposed that the northern portion of this state was not favourable for bees, but Aroostook County, in the extreme north, produces nearly as much honey as all the other 15 counties, and the honey is put up in the most marketable shape. But I fear the bees are not protected as they should be in this northern climate. We have had a cold winter, and the loss has been very great. I winter my bees in the cellar with success, and obtain much pleasure, as well as profit, from the time I devote to them. The Weekly Bee Journal is my constant companion. Isaac F. Plummer, Augusta, Maine. End of section 18. Recording by John Wilcox Beanie.
Section 19 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. Our LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Selections from our letterbox, Part 3. Not discouraged. Should I be persuaded to give up the business of keeping bees for profit, I do not know what I could find what would pay better. I have 25 colonies in good condition, and everyone in this town wants honey, and I shall try to supply it to them. Charles Follett, Osage, Iowa. Lost but 4 out of 273. My bees are wintering well. I have lost but 4 out of 273 colonies, wintered on the summer stands, packed with sawdust and planer shavings. It has paid me to advertise in the Weekly Bee Journal. I have all the work I can do. A. E. Manham, Bristol, Vermont, March 9th, 1881. Dead bees in the cells. I took 6 combs out of 2 hives in which the bees died, that had plenty of honey in the 2 outside frames. In every cell of the 3 middle frames is a dead bee. I tried to pick them out with a pin, but gave it up for a bad job. Is there a way to clean them? Can I use the combs again next spring? Please let me know in the next journal. John W. Sturwold. Haymont, Indiana, March 11th, 1881. You will find our method given in answer to Mr. Phillips, page 86 of this number. The combs can be used again this spring. The Editor. Progressing. My bees are getting along well. I have lost 3 weak colonies that were left unprotected, but it was my own fault. A hive peddler was in this section this winter selling hives without frames. I showed him my hives, similar to the Langstroth, and he took the measure of it and said I was well fixed for beekeeping. He never said a word about selling his hive to me. I do not know how many he sold. John Borstler. Gilead, Illinois, February 26, 1881. Moldy combs, etc. Having lost a few colonies of bees the past winter, I wish to make the best use of the combs left, as they are mostly new. Some are mouldy. What shall I do with them? Some of the cells are full of dead bees. How shall I get them out? How can I keep the moth out of the combs until I can use them? An answer to these questions through the weekly at an early day will no doubt benefit many new beginners. O. Phillips, Emporia, Kansas, March 2nd, 1881. When your colonies are strong in the spring, give the mouldy combs. They will soon utilize them, if not given too fast. The combs with dead bees should be kept in a dry place, and after the bees have become dried and shrunken, you can easily shake them out of the cells. If moths get in the combs, treat them in the manner suggested by Mr. Doolittle, page 74, Bee Journal of March 9th. 1 pound of sulphur, however, to each 100 cubic feet seems a large amount. This would require 10 pounds for a room 10 feet square. We have had no experience in sulphuring combs, but think 1 pound would be sufficient for 1,000 cubic feet in a close room. The Editor. Palestine bees. We are having a hard winter on bees. They have not had a fly since last October 28th. Bees that were here kept in old-style boxes are nearly all dead. Many that were packed in chaff are dead or have the dysentery, and are flying out on our coldest days, and of course never return. My bees that are in chaff tenement hives are in the best condition of any I have seen. My Palestine bees are standing the lonely confinement in the hives better than the Italians. They are quieter and do not fly out so much, and get lost on the snow. I much like the weekly bee journal, and when I got the journal of February 2nd out of the office, I felt like grasping the hand of the editor and having a shake, but alas, it was not flesh and blood, but a very good likeness. Many thanks for giving us a chance to view it. I. R. Good. Napanee, Indiana, February 2nd, 1881. Honey as Medicine. I wish to compile for publication an exhibit of the medicinal qualities of the various kinds of honey, and I shall be obliged for any facts sent me on the subject. Chaff packing seems to be ahead here this winter, but I notice a great difference in the wintering capacity of several colonies. All of mine which were devoted to the production of honey are doing well, but I have lost by excessive early breeding, and some that were used to rear queens. They had no flight for 4 months. T. L. von Dorn, South Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska, March 9th, 1881. Gathering pollen. Last season proved a splendid one for bees. Each colony averaged 72 pounds of surplus sweet honey, and from 20 to 40 pounds of bitter. My bees are blacks, and today are out gathering pollen and some honey. E. P. Massey, Waco, Texas, March 1st, 1881. Anxious for spring. The monthly was good, but a more frequent visitor in the shape of the weekly is better. It brings fresh news, ready for use. I spent an hour in my cellar last evening examining my bees. I was heartsick at the condition in which I found them. I had about 40 colonies in the fall. At least 1/2 of them are dead. I have an excellent cellar, especially for my bees, and have not lost a colony before for 5 or 6 years. I began to think that losing bees in winter was an unnecessary thing, but I see that I was mistaken, for my bees did not lack for care in any particular. The death of mine is from dysentery. The small amount of honey collected in this vicinity last year was of very poor quality, as is seen from the fact that it has not candied during the winter. I extracted about 300 pounds and put it away in glass jars, and it looks like so much New Orleans molasses. My friend, Mr. Bishop, had about 40 colonies in the fall. All are now dead but 6. They were left on their summer stands. Mr. B is lonesome, and wants my bees put in his apiary next summer to keep him company, but it remains yet to be seen if I will have any left to keep up a humming in my own apiary. I met Mr. Gardner of this city the other day, and he reports all of his 16 colonies dead. Several other bee-men have told me that but few, if any, of their bees are alive. Winter still holds on with an iron grasp. Our bees so much need a cleansing flight. I am anxiously waiting for some warm days. I. P. Wilson, Burlington, Iowa, March 4th, 1881. Died of disease. I have lost about all the bees I had, yet I love to hear of others' success in the bee business and read of others' way of management. But I am convinced that my bees died of some disease, the same as Mr. Carver reported from Greencastle, Indiana, although bees have not died so universally throughout this country as mine have. I have the hives and combs left, with lots of honey in them. These I can sell for something, perhaps, or melt them into wax, or get a few colonies of bees to begin anew. But it is very poor encouragement to put much stock in bees, the way it looks now. D. W. Fletcher, Lansingville, New York, March 4th, 1881. Cyprians ahead. Bees doing well. They are commencing to work on plum bloom. They have brood in all stages. In an average of over 30 colonies of Cyprians, they are farther ahead in brood rearing than the Italians. The latter have had the same chance as the former. Am very busy now preparing for queen rearing. J. H. P. Brown, Augusta, Georgia, March 2nd, 1881. An early season. I see from reports in our new weekly journal that bees are dying throughout the north and west more than usual, from short stores and intense cold. I may say that we have had an unprecedented cold winter here. The thermometer at one time ranged for a few hours as low as 18 degrees above zero, but soon struggled back to about 2.5 degrees below. Last fall our bees gathered a full supply of fall honey, and none will die from cold or starve out that are worth saving. The winter being wet, white clover is coming out very thick over the ground. Maple, elm, plum, and wild cherry are now in bloom, as well as heads of white clover that are pushing out their lovely forms to the genial sun. Bees usually work on white clover here by the 10th of this month, but this year our honey season will be much later. May the new departure prosper and lead us forward to perfection. J. W. Winder, Thibodaux, Louisiana, February 10th, 1881. Mr. Winder enclosed us some white clover blossoms of this year's growth. The sight of the modest flowers is refreshing, while from our office windows the earth looks bleak and gloomy with its deep mantle of snow. The Editor. End of section 19.
Section 20 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Painter. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Selections from our letterbox, Part 4. Gone back on him. I had 30 colonies of bees, most of them Italians, last fall, in Langstroth hives, packed in this way. The ends of my hives are double-walled, and the sides are made double in winter by the use of division boards in place of 2 frames, leaving but 8 frames. I then use a crate made of laths, which sets down around the hive so as to leave a space of about 8 inches for packing between it and the hive on the sides and back end. This space I fill with a packing of fine straw and leaves mixed, and packed hard when just a little damp. Then strips of board are fitted so as to protect the top of the straw from rain or snow. Next a blanket over the frames and 6 inches of chaff over that, protected by the cap, in which are openings so as to give free circulation of air above the chaff. The entrance is kept open enough for a good supply of air. In this way I have heretofore had good success in wintering on summer stands, but this winter it has gone back on me. Until last Saturday, the 5th inst., there has been no day warm enough for bees to fly for some months. Many did come out, even on the coldest days, but of course could live but a few moments out of the hive. I let them entirely alone, except to see that the entrances were free, until day before yesterday, when it was warm enough for bees to fly. I looked them over and found only 12 of them alive. Only 4 of these are in good condition. The others are weak and the hives a good deal soiled. Now what puzzles me is this. They were all, apparently, very nearly alike last October, and now 4 of them are in perfect condition, while all the others were bad. Now why the 4 exceptions out of 30? I am glad for them, but would like to understand the reason. Can you tell us, Mr. Editor? They have evidently not been cold, and have had plenty of honey. In the dead ones I examined, I find brood in a hatching state, with half or more of the cells empty, indicating that young bees had hatched. I attribute the disaster to long confinement. But why the 4 exceptions? I say amen to all the compliments you publish from your subscribers for the Bee Journal. D. K. Boutell, Lake City, Minnesota, March the 7th, 1881. Probably during some of the milder days of winter, the bees became scattered in their hives. The weather suddenly changed, and they perished before they could form their cluster on honey, and thus starved. Editor. From Florida. The Bee Journal is at hand. We do not know how we could do without it. The past has been a very good honey season here. We have 255 colonies of bees in Langstroth hives. Some are Italians. We like them as honey gatherers, but they are crosser than our natives. We obtained 850 gallons honey and 500 pounds wax. The latter we obtained from about 90 hives, which we transferred. We think apiculture will pay here with good management. We extracted from one colony 32 Langstroth frames well filled with honey. Our apiary is located on a gum swamp 5 or 6 miles wide and 15 or 20 miles long, which is our main honey source, and blooms from April the 15th till May the 15th. We also have many other honey-producing flowers. We have a vine which grows in the swamps and yields a great deal of amber-coloured honey. We enclose a sprig. Please give the name. Alderman and Roberts. Wewachica, Florida. The vine you send is commonly known as snow vine and is quite abundant in several of the southern states. Editor. Bee feeding. I have thus far used the bag feeder of our friend Professor Cook with this addition. I have a long tin tube shaped like the handle to a water dipper, long enough to reach through the bag of chaff and empty into the bag. Then, with the aid of a funnel, I can daily place the warm food within reach of the bees without disturbing them or letting out the heat, so precious in early spring to a depleted colony. I've never tried the Professor's perfection, thought I saw objections to it. If any of our more experienced beekeepers have devised a better way, please tell me through our journal, EMR, Flint, Michigan, March the 4th, 1881. Introduced a queen. Bad luck to bees in this valley of the Ohio. Of 32 colonies in Langstroth hives, 18 now remain, and the 4th day of March a perfect blizzard all day, so I fear I will lose more from spring dwindling. I found, one day in February, all the bees dead but 2, and the queen nearly gone in one hive, but plenty of honey. I had a queenless colony and laid these 3 bees on the frames to see if they would come to life. They became warm and crept down among the bees. The next warm spell I looked, and the yellow queen was safe among the black bees. A novel way to introduce a queen in February. G. W. Ashby, Valley Station, Kentucky, March the 5th, 1881. Loss 88%. The loss of bees in Wayne and Randolph counties is heavy, about 88%. Our bees had a fly Feb 26, the first for 111 days. We have reports from 1,400 colonies, November count, and March the 1st finds them all dead but 171. The Italians have come through better than the blacks. Those packed in chaff on summer stands have wintered better than any other mode in this locality. There is a great call for bees here by parties that are wanting to start again. Our loss is 4 out of 15 colonies, all in chaff hives. M. G. Reynolds. Williamsburg, Indiana, March the 7th, 1881. First year's experience. Bees done poorly here last season. There was an abundance of bloom, but too much rain. I sowed 1 acre of buckwheat. While this lasted, my bees stored more honey than at any other time in the season. I think it an excellent honey plant. Pumpkin blossoms yield considerable honey. Would it pay to plant them all over a field of corn? My bees are packed in chaff, and they are all in good condition at present. They have not had a flight since the 1st of November. Success to the Weekly Bee Journal. I like it better than the monthly. William Hagen. Holly, Michigan, January the 18th, 1881. Pumpkin blossoms yield a rich but strongly flavoured honey. We think the pumpkins would be remunerative for their cultivation to feed to stock, and that the honey obtained from the blossoms would be a net profit. Editor. Summer a long way off. This winter has been, so far, the most severe known for many years in this part of the state. Snowstorm has followed snowstorm, and cold spell has followed cold spell. Until now there is more snow on the ground than we have had altogether for 6 or 7 years. And the poor bees, how have they fared through all the snow and cold? Badly, I fear, from the reports I hear every few days. But so far as heard from, where they were properly cared for, either in cellar or on summer stands, they are doing quite well. But summer is a long way off. Harry G. Burnett, Blairstown, Iowa, March the 5th, 1881. A little discouraged. I am a little discouraged this spring. I put 54 colonies into winter quarters last fall, and now have but 23, and some of them are weak. Those in my bee house suffered the worst. I had 20 colonies on the summer stands, packed with cut straw, and lost 6 of them by dysentery and starvation. If bees are strong in numbers and have plenty of honey, I can see that there is no danger of loss. Last season it was so dry here that the white clover dried up, and the bees could get but little honey, and what they did gather was very dark. I am glad to receive the Bee Journal weekly now. The news comes and seems so fresh. I hope it will be well supported. J. W. Reike, Montclair, New Jersey, March the 6th, 1881. Why did they die? Last fall I put my bees into a dry cellar. Some of them had 75 pounds of honey, and in 4 or 5 weeks there were many dead bees. I cleaned them up, but in a few weeks more they all died. What was the cause of this? Over 80% of all the bees in this vicinity are dead. R. L. Holman, Springfield, Ohio, February the 19th, 1881. Your colonies were strong, had a large quantity of honey, and the cellar was too warm. They commenced breeding, became uneasy, and left their hives from disquietude. Editor. Wintered without loss. I packed 41 colonies, and they are now all living, and nearly all appear to be in good condition. My bees are flying today. Many beekeepers in this country have lost heavily and are much disheartened. I hope to be able to make a good showing when I report again, say about May the 1st. J. J. Rowe. Buchanan, Michigan, March the 9th, 1881. End of section 20.
Section 21 of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. The American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various. Convention Notes. Champlain Valley, Vermont Convention. This association held its winter meeting at Brandon, Vermont, on January 20, 21, 1881. President Crane in the chair, Colonel H. H. Merritt gave an address of welcome, to which President Crane replied, stating the object of the meeting and giving a brief narration of the ancient history of the honey bee, and of its improved management in the present age. Mr. A. E. Manham said success depended upon the man and circumstances. The beekeeper should be a person of even temperament, not easily excited, should be somewhat acquainted with botany, and recommended small section boxes to hold not more than 2 pounds. Everything should be kept ready and in order. He gave an estimate of produce in a good season with Italian bees, and also a poor season like the past. Mr. O. C. Wade of Georgia said that experience had shown that beekeeping was no mystery or sleight of hand, but a clear, plain, practical science. Beekeepers were an intelligent, enterprising class of men of progress. No intelligent man would destroy his bees. After some discussion, Mr. Manham exhibited some of his honey boxes and explained their uses and advantages. Bees were advantageous in the orchard and to the buckwheat crop, as he had satisfactorily demonstrated. Some doubts had been expressed to the value of the red clover blossom on account of the inability of the bee to reach the nectary. Italians have the advantage over black bees because they are provided with greater length of proboscis. President Crane said he had noticed bees working in red clover early and late in the season. Bees will not work where they get no honey. In the evening, after a few preliminaries, Mr. E. A. Hasseltine read a sensible and witty poem on prospects and retrospects, which was well received by the audience. The talk on sweets by Professor Seeley was a learned dissertation on the chemical properties and qualities of the various kinds of sweets that are offered in our markets. He exhibited over 20 different kinds of sugar, spoke of the various substances from which sugar was extracted, as trees, plants, roots, and fruits. Some specimens would solidify sooner than others. Sugar from cane, corn, beets, and maple were all of the same chemical formation. J. E. Crane spoke on the individuality of bees. There was a marked difference in the character of colonies. Some were industrious, others not so. Some prefer some kinds of flowers, others reject them. Italians dislike buckwheat, while black bees work well on it. Every colony has some peculiar character. He showed several examples of honey from different flowers, and explained their various qualities, and also exhibited specimens of bees from the Holy Land. Dr. F. Bond said that the Creator had placed the sweets in flowers to attract the bee, to carry out nature's laws, by carrying the fertilizing pollen to the unfertile flower, and thus showing a wise and beneficent providence. On Friday, January 21st, after some preliminary business, the following were elected officers for the ensuing year: President J. E. Crane, Vice Presidents H. L. Leonard, E. P. Wolcott, E. A. Hasseltine, Secretary and Treasurer Honorable T. Brookins. Mr. O.C. Waite spoke of the bad condition he found honey in the Boston market, and of the manner of awarding premiums at fairs. Mr. Manham remarked that it was important to have good queens. He advised all to raise their own. Old queens were best to rear queens from, say 2 years old or more. It is best to rear queens in warm weather when honey is plenty. The question, how to prevent bees from dwindling, Mr. Leonard answered thus: In this case, as in all other ills to which beekeepers are heir to, keep the colony strong and healthy. Mr. Leonard read an essay on Bee Culture for Women, giving instances of marked success. He said women in Vermont were as capable and had as good facilities as in any part of the country, and would succeed as well if attended to. Adjourned to meet at Bristol, Vermont, in May next. T. Brookins, Secretary. End section 21. End of the American Bee Journal, Volume 17, Number 11, March 1881, by Various.